Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, a singing astronaut with 1 million Twitter followers. That's Chris Hadfield. He's out of space and in the stream. What a good day to have an astronaut on the program. The New Horizons spacecraft has been whizzing past Pluto. Good time to have an expert in the stream. Lika Palau, our digital producer, what do you have for us?
Well, it's been a journey that's been about 9 years in the making,
Sure.
so this is pretty historic, but we've finally gotten our closest glimpse of Pluto yet, and people are talking about it online. They're using hashtag #PlutoFlyby. You can see that on my screen here. We've been so far away that Pluto has been hard to see, so this is the clearest image that we've seen yet. Now, we're going to pick the commander's brain on that and other things, so we want you to send your questions with hashtag AJStream.
Excellent. Now, you can learn a lot about a man by his moustache. That's what Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield's biography says. So what is his stash telling us? Well, this man has escorted Soviet bombers out of Canadian airspace. He's lived in a research vessel under the sea and commanded the International Space Station. Hadfield grew up on a corn farm and became the very first Canadian to walk in space. His 6 months on the space station made him a YouTube sensation. He's now back in Canada and he's here with us today to talk about how living in space has helped him navigate life on Earth. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Femi and Malika, it's nice to talk with you both.
It's great to have you. I have my own crew here. I'm commander of my own crew. I have 3 people who are ready and raring to ask you questions, as well as our online community as well. So your super fans today are Mohit Gupta from India. He's studying aerospace engineering at Georgia Tech University in the US. In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Alda is a space enthusiast who wants one day to make that very difficult journey to Mars. And in London, we have Eleanor Harding. She's a South African product developer who competes in hackathons and codes for fun. So welcome, Joelda, Eleanor and Mohit. Chris, I know there are going to be people watching this show who are going to be inspired and want to be astronauts, but I want to keep it real for them. I would like you to describe coming down in the Soyuz capsule to Earth in vivid detail, because it's not pretty.
When you come back from a spaceship, you're going incredibly fast. You're going 5 miles a second, or 8 kilometers a second in order to stay in orbit. So somehow you have to slow down. And the way we do that is to fire our engines a tiny little bit so our orbit goes from being a circle to being sort of an oval or an ellipse. And the lowest part of the oval starts to touch the atmosphere. And as soon as the spaceship gets low enough to start to touch the atmosphere, suddenly the brakes go on. It's an incredible amount of drag, and you're squished down into the floor of the spaceship, and it comes thundering through as if you were flying a meteorite home. And then finally you've endured that, you get close enough to the ground, a huge parachute opens with a big snap, and then you crash into the ground with a absolutely undeniable thud, and then the vehicle tumbles and rolls to a stop. And as your image shows here, they open up the hatch and drag you out. You're weak as a kitten after 6 months in orbit. You're nauseous, your balance system is shot, you faint if you stood up, but it's a magnificent return. It is the last coda step of an incredible symphony of a voyage, and despite all the nausea and everything, it's a really wonderful moment in life to be home.
There's one bit of advice that stuck with me, which was, as you're coming down, stop talking, because what might happen to your tongue?
Well, when you hit the Earth, you know, the spaceship weighs 3 tons. So even though it's a big parachute, you hit the Earth like a car crash. And so our Russian instructors actually tell us, remember, stop talking so you don't bite your tongue off. And I think it's a good thing to remind each other of. It's kind of a reality check of just how harsh the landing is going to be.
I love that you answered that, because that's actually a tweet we just got from someone wanting to know what it was like to walk back on Earth. But you answered that, so I'm going to go to this tweet. This is from Monica, and she says, I guess that sometimes you needed to improvise to solve problems. So what is the most MacGyver thing that you did in space? Since for our international audience, MacGyver was a secret agent on a television show here in the US in the 80s. So Chris, what's your take on that?
You have to solve strange problems every day with whatever's available. There was one of the space flights where they had to build this great big fly swatter contraption to be able to reach out on the end of the arm and grab a satellite with it. They had to make it from scratch. On another one, one of the space station's solar arrays tore, and they had to build this great big sort of needle stitching set to be able to go outside on a spacewalk and stitch this together, something they never thought of. And during our flight, the space station started spewing liquid ammonia. We had a big leak on the outside. We had to invent a spacewalk on one day's notice and make everything work. Two of us outside with ammonia bouncing around, which is kind of a nasty chemical, in order to save the life of the whole spaceship. So you're in a far away from home, limited number of resources. You're constantly inventing how to do things in a different way. That's the only way that you can operate a spaceship.
Chris, I'm going to show you some video here. Hold on a minute, Mohit, and we'll come right to you. I'm going to show Chris a little bit of video, Mohit, and this is history for you, but this is something that I think is very dear to Chris. Let me just show you this. This is the Apollo 11 mission, 1969. Where were you, Chris, when you saw this?
I was actually about 100 yards from where I'm sitting right now, because it was July of 1969, and this is in a summer house that I'm in right now, a little old cottage. And I was here, just down in one of the adjoining cottages. Nobody has a television here, or didn't at the time, and so we all gathered in one of the cottagers who had a television, and that same sort of ghost-like, slow updated black and white image. I watched those two people walk on the moon just before I turned 10 years old, right in this place. And that's what really both inspired and convinced me that I should try and turn myself into an astronaut.
That single moment, Chris, they're just seeing that black and white footage, that was it.
Yeah. I have a question.
And going outside afterwards, Femi, to look up at the sun, or I'm sorry, to look up at the moon as it was reflecting the light of the sun, to look up and see the moon and realize that it is now possible to walk on the moon, where this morning that had been impossible. To see the impossible made real, that was like a door opening for me as a kid, and everything I've done since was really the daughter of that moment.
All right, so we've got some questions for you. Mohit, you go first. Geraldo, you go second. Mohit, what did you want to add?
You talked that, I know that you decided at the age of 9 to be an astronaut. And in this advanced era of technology, when we have so much to do and so much to be someone in the future, how can one student decide at the early stage, how can his mind be developed, and then how can he persevere his efforts towards making that happen? That doesn't seem to happen in these days.
Well, I don't think the days really matter. I think it's just sort of human nature, Mohit. Here's what I would recommend. The next time you go into a library or you go into a bookstore, I would bet, Mohit, that you don't go to every single section of the library or the bookstore the same. There are certain parts of the bookstore that attract you, that interest you. Maybe, I don't know, archaeology and horse racing and submarines. Doesn't really matter. There's probably some parts that are inherently fascinating to you. And then I would do yourself the favor of saying, that's who I am. That's what my fundamental heart is. So what if I could become someone who worked in one of those fields? Who would I be? What could I be? Give yourself the hint of the freedom to think in a bookshop, and then set that as your one of your long-term goals, and then work yourself towards it. Start making the little decisions in life that sort of move it along towards that goal. And you probably won't get to be the world's best brain surgeon, but it doesn't really matter. You will have moved your life in a direction that fundamentally interests you, and you'll be doing yourself a favor, and you'll be able to sustain it longer, and maybe even someday you'll get to fly in space.
See, Joalda wants to go to Mars, okay? There's not even a one-way ticket to Mars right now, Joalda, so I'm hoping that by the time you're a little bit older, there'll be a way for you to get to Mars and get back again. But what did you want to ask Chris? What did you want to ask him?
I want to ask, other than one of the hardest things you've done while you're up in space, what was your favorite memory while you're up there?
Joalda, I commend you for having a long-term goal for yourself, and then the key, of course, is to change yourself to be that dream. What is my best memory? I was lucky enough to do 2 spacewalks. On my second flight, I flew in space 3 times, but on my second flight, we had to go outside and build something with human dexterity and human creativity, and to be on the outside of a spaceship, alone in the universe, with the enormity of the universe, not just like on Earth where you look up at it as if you were, I don't know, sitting in your mom's lap or something, but actually to be in the universe alone, and to see the world as something separate from you, and you're just holding on with one hand. That is a magnificent place to be, and I hold the memory and the imagery and also the significance of that really dear in my mind all the time. To have seen the northern lights like they're being shown right now. I've gone through the southern lights where they were rippling between my feet as I was outside on a spacewalk. That I think is the most magnificent experience of my entire life.
I will say I am verifiably jealous. But Chris, I want to chime in here, picking up on Joalda's goals. I want to read you 2 tweets from someone online. This is Parladio, who says, would you board a mission to Mars if you had the chance? Probably a one-way ticket, as Femi mentioned. But on the other hand, there's a tweet from Osore who says, why is it taking such a long time for man to reach the moon? So delve into this argument between where should the mission be focused? Is it more about a settlement or a colony on the moon, or should we be looking at Mars?
Well, I think the way the question is phrased, the first one is a little bit revealing. Would I board a mission? Astronauts don't board missions. We invent space flight. We're a part of a huge team that has to build the spaceship, invent it, test it, make it work, and then try it over and over and over again where conditions are safe before you would ever try and take the chance of risking pointing it at something as far away as Mars. That's what we're doing up on the space station right now to a large degree, is testing equipment. What do you make the hull out of? How do you make a toilet work? How do you recycle your water? How do you not go crazy? And we'll test it up on the space station for the next 10 or 15 years, but we still won't be ready. And I think inevitably, on our way to Mars, we will spend generations on the moon. We won't just probe the moon. As your second question said, why does it take so long? Because we don't want to just have everyone die in the process. Yeah. It's really complicated. Sure. And I think we will take this first step to the space station, and then we'll take a generation or 2 on the moon until we've invented enough things and tested them that then we can turn our nose with confidence towards Mars and the inevitability of expanded human exploration.
Eleanor?
Chris, I find that space travel is quite easily quantifiable in terms of failure, in that, like, failure with space travel is loss of human life. I read an astronaut's guide and I really enjoyed it, but I found that it was applicable more than just space travel. Like, I work in the startup space, and I found a lot of the lessons to be quite applicable over there. But where failure in space travel is quite easily loss of human life, failure in startups are not as easy to define, and I find it to be quite intangible. So a lot of your lessons are about preparing for the failure and knowing how you would handle it. But how would you recommend preparing for failure where it's intangible?
Well, I think, thank you, Eleanor. I think the failure is around you all the time. Hardly anything ever goes perfectly. Like something as simple as going for a run and you break a shoelace, or it starts raining, or you forgot your keys, or you twist your ankle, or there's a puddle, or a dog comes at you. It's not going to go exactly perfectly, and the real key is to visualize all of those small failures. You don't have to die for it to be a failure. What you're trying to do is get it as close to perfection as possible. And so whether it's managing a startup or whether it's in Alda's case of trying to finish school in such a way that she'll be eligible perhaps to, I guess in Mohit's case as well, eligible to be an astronaut, or whether you're flying a spaceship. You have to decide, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is my definition of perfection. What are all the things that are going to go wrong? Because things always go wrong. And those are the failures you have to prepare for, not just the gigantic failure, but all the little ones, and try and skirt through as many of those as possible so that you can be as successful on the way and improve your chances of reaching your ultimate aim. And it's the only way that we can operate spaceships.
Chris, my favorite phrase of yours is, I'm going to get you to finish the phrase, there is no problem so bad
that you can't make it worse.
I love that. That is the mantra for my life.
It's worth remembering.
Yes. It's like it could always be worse. Yeah.
And so all that means is recognize the fact that you can always make things worse.
Yeah.
So the only way to improve your odds is to visualize failure, to practice when the consequences are very low, so that when the actual time comes, you have a best chance of reaching out and throwing the correct switch, or of doing the right thing, or saying the right thing. And I think it's maybe not a bad lesson for life in general, not just for astronauts.
As you can tell, I wrote that one down, Malika.
Well, as promised, Chris, at the top of this show, we want to talk about what everyone online is talking about now, at least those who are interested in space. It's this picture. Pluto sent a love note back to Earth via NASA New Horizons. This is one of the images taken before the Pluto flyby. So we got this question, picking up on that, Chris. This is a really cool question. I love it, from Susanna. She says, talk of snow on Pluto blew my mind this morning. What amazed you about today's Pluto visit?
If you look at that picture, I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words, of course, and we have all sorts of sensors on New Horizons that are looking at a lot of things that a human eyeball can't see. But most of us are very visually informed. And so to see what used to be a fuzzy Hubble image of Pluto suddenly coming into sharp focus, what surprises me is that it's not symmetrical, in that you would think the North Pole and the South Pole would sort of look like each other, and the equator would be all sort of one type of thing. And yet, when you look at Pluto, you can see it's had a very troubled past. It's got impact marks or irregularities on it. It's got a dark lower section and a brighter upper section. And we're learning how planets behave. You know, we want to do a good job with Earth, but it's really hard if you only look at one patient to try and figure out how to set up a healthcare system. And in order to understand how Earth works, we really need to understand how planets work. And what we've seen of all the other planets in the solar system, it's taught us a lot. But looking at this little dwarf planet, that's smaller than the moon, and seeing it to be such an irregular, distant thing, we've learned more about Pluto in the last day than we knew in all of human history. It's kind of a really interesting day in discovery.
Yeah, that's really amazing. Chris, one of the reasons people are very fond of you, not only because you have a passion for space and science and you're a fantastic communicator, but also because you've got a sense of humor and make very cool videos. How did the videos get started?
Well, when I was training for my space flight, I realized that if something seems sort of fun and cool to me, then somebody else will probably find it the same way. And I'd had a lot of documentary crews follow me around, and so I'd sort of watched how you make a little movie. You know, there's an intro, and you set the scene, and then something happens, and then you react to it, and then you show a perspective. And so I thought, I'm going to try and do that. This is too cool an experience to just keep to myself. And so I just kept the little video. The Canadian Space Agency gave me one of those little video cameras, and I would just, you know, sort of chronicle what I was doing. And I taught myself how to make an interesting little video. And so when I got to space, one day I was just trimming my fingernails. And I thought, how do you trim your fingernails without gravity? The fingernails are going to fly everywhere. Or what happens to water, like in this video? And I thought, I'm just going to show people what happens if you cry in space. Where do the tears go? They don't fall. How does it sit on your eye? Just all the little questions that everybody always asks. I thought, how do you make a sandwich? I thought, why not? Rather than just keeping it to myself, I'll show people. because I'm in such a
You had a lot of
place.
thinking time, Chris.
No, actually, I just while I was eating, I would just slap a camera up on the wall and just make it while I was going. And there was a lady at the Canadian Space Agency who then edited it into those nice little videos. And gosh, hundreds of millions of people have seen those videos since.
Jada?
I remember last year when I first started watching your videos, it amazed me because I never knew you could do so much stuff like that and how hard it would be to make like a sandwich on.
Joelda, have you seen the one about the nuts? Have you seen the nuts video?
I think so, yeah.
All right, just in case you haven't seen it, or just as a reminder, here we have Chris Hadfield and mixed nuts in space. Take a look. Very entertaining.
You know what was cool about that?
Yeah, go on.
When I opened that can of nuts, my immediate reaction, because they were all floating and flying around in there, was I thought it was full of insects. I thought it was full of like flying bumblebees and maggots. So I immediately closed it, and then I realized, oh, it's just mixed nuts in weightlessness. And then I thought, if that looked cool to me, that's going to look cool to everybody. So I just quick grabbed the camera and made that little 10-second video. And and millions of people have looked at that, and they've been surprised by weightlessness, surprised by discovery. It's very trivial, but if people start to think, if that's what happens just to nuts in a can, then what happens to your blood in your body, or what happens to the fuel in your tank, or what happens to all kinds of things? And it's like opening the door to imagination.
Well, another video that opened up a lot of our doors of imagination, of course, was the one that I think you might be most famous for, and that is the David Bowie cover, Space Oddity. So we got a question here on Facebook regarding that video, and for those who haven't seen it, you'll see a little bit of a clip online. You can find it on YouTube, but in it you are playing a guitar. So Dyer here on Facebook says, was it comfortable playing a guitar in space, Chris?
For Dyer, it's bizarre playing a guitar without gravity, because for anybody who's a guitar player out there, you're used to either the guitar hanging in the strap underneath you, or you set it, you know, that cutout in the bottom of the guitar, you set it on your knee. So the guitar is stable. So when you move your hand up and down the neck, the guitar sits rock solid. When you're weightless, the guitar just flies. And if you move your hand, the whole guitar takes off sideways from you. And so it was very difficult to play intricate work on a guitar up in orbit. I kind of had to reteach my left hand where to fret on the fretboard.
Chris, let's have a listen to a little clip of this, because this is part of your new album, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But have a listen to Space Oddity in space.
This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. Want to know whose shirts you wear, but it's time to guide the capsule if you dare. This is Major Tom to ground control. I've left forevermore.
So that track is on the world's first album in space, called The World's First Album in Space. What else is on the album, Chris? What else?
Well, there's a guitar permanently up on the space station. Our psychiatrists put it up there, the NASA psychiatrists.
Okay.
And I played it almost every day. And I've been a musician my whole life, and I wrote a bunch of music while I was there. And so I recorded it while I was up there. And just recently, I've been in studio. So we're going to use my voice and guitar from orbit, and then we've put instrumental tracks underneath. And the album comes out, I guess, August 7th is the release, and then the album will be out in October. But it's a complete work of art from off the planet. And when you think about exploration, when you think about what's new in the human experience, when we first start moving to a place, we bring our culture with us, and then it starts to evolve how the music became jazz in New Orleans or bluegrass in the Adirondacks.
Chris Hadfield. Your story is too big for one show. We're taking you to the post show. Take a breath, I know Joelda and Mohit and also Eleanor have many more things to talk to you about, and we have the post show just big enough for you and our online community. The former commander of the International Space Station, Chris Hadfield, he's going to be joining us online at stream.aljazeera.com. Thanks for watching. Hello again. We are back in the post show with Chris Hadfield. He's the former commander of the International Space Station. He has got stories that would go on for years and years and years. I could sit and listen to you forever, but I also have a lot of people who want to talk to you as well. Malika, what do you have?
I'm going to play a video comment from someone who tweeted us several times and left you this message. This is a question for you. This is from Juan John Jedi. That's his handle. So have a listen to what he asked.
What parts of our galaxy inside the Kuiper Belt do you think we still need to explore? Thank you.
So, Chris, are you in retirement for good, or do you want to do some of this exploring that he's asking about?
I think one of the most fundamental questions that we'd all like to answer is, are we alone in the universe or not? And if we can find any trace of life anywhere else in our solar system, even if it's just the faintest, tiniest microbial life, that will answer the question that there's life everywhere. And so I think that's where we should be looking most within, as the gentleman said, within the Kuiper Belt, within our own solar system. So I think Mars merits a huge amount of exploration, as do some of the larger asteroids that may have water and some of the moons of the big gas planets that have water. I think all of those, I mean, Enceladus, we're watching what seem to be fountains of largely water that are feeding the rings of Saturn. I mean, there's a tremendous number of things that we've only just started to barely look at. And I think the number one question of trying to see if we're alone or not is worthy of continuing to explore all those remote places.
Mohit, what did you want to say? Go ahead.
We are fond of you because, not only because of your occupation or what you do, we are fond of you because how you do it. So there have been questions about coming back to Earth and your incredible things in space. But I have a question. When you go to space, you leave your family behind. You move out really outwards of the Earth's radius rather than going parallel to the horizon, what we students do when we move out of our family. But still we have communication channels which are really good. But you have some situations where the communication channels are really disruptive. So how do you channel yourself to stay away from your family when you need them the most?
You know, I think it's only been very recently, Mohit, that people can be near each other so often and so easily. In human history, think of all the sailors, think of soldiers, think of firefighters, think of people that travel to go deal with problems in other places where there was no telephone, where you would easily be gone for months, where all you would have is letter writing. I think it's only very recently that we've gotten used to high-speed, steady communication with each other. And It's not so bad. It's mostly just a matter of expectation. And as an astronaut, the thing maybe that you don't know is, yes, when you're off the Earth, you're a long ways away, but I was away from home about 2/3 of the time for 20 years. Astronaut, because it's an international space station, you train all over the Earth. So you're away from home almost all the time. So you need to build a family that doesn't need you to be physically present all the time, where instead you do communicate remotely, and when you are there, you make the most of it.
So, Chris, since you are away from home and you're with this new family, I hear Eleanor, and I'll get to you in just a second, but picking up on what Chris said, we got a tweet here, so I want to pose this to him. Ikenna on Twitter says, how did you manage spending 6 months with few people, and were there tense times in relations with fellow astronauts? Chris, since you were saying these have to be your new family members.
Well, actually, I spent about 4.5 years with those people. We didn't meet each other in orbit, of course. We were selected as a crew years in advance, and then we trained together all over the world under all different sort of circumstances. I climbed mountains with some of those guys. I went flying. I played music with them. I lived at the bottom of the ocean in a habitat with some of those people. I did survival with them. I lived for years in simulators with them. And so by the time we got to orbit, we knew each other very, very well. And we knew each other's strengths and weaknesses. And in all of my time training, I never once had an emotional blow up with them. It was always technical discussions, but we recognized that the group is more important than the individual. Ah. And as the commander, I really tried to instill that in everyone as well. Make sure that each person does one nice thing without asking for every other crew member every day. Think about the other crew. Always put yourself second. And with that, I don't think you could succeed otherwise living so far from Earth, but it also built an environment and a psychology that made it much more enjoyable for everybody.
Eleanor, hold tight for 1 minute. I know you're not going to forget your question. What happens then, Chris, when you get out of that very intense relationship and then you have to go back to civilian life? What happens to you?
I think some people might view it as if everything else is now going to be boring, as if everything else is going to be plain and mundane. But I really try and enjoy everything I've done. There's a chapter in the book where I talk about building a dock. In fact, the dock is just over there that I built. And I needed to build a new dock at my cottage, and I put everything into it, and I invented it with my neighbor, and we did it by hand and solved problems. And I felt just as proud of building that dock as I did of living on a space station. It was something I did. And so you could say to me, boy, now that you've finished building that dock, you know, what else are you going to do with your life? But I view everything that way, and I'm always just looking for a different metaphorical dock to build.
Sure. Eleanor, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Okay, I've got two questions. I was going to ask a different one, but now it's more relevant to ask this one. Do you ever worry about reaching peak Chris? I've always worried about reaching peak Eleanor, that you reach a point where this is the biggest thing that you will have ever done. But on the other hand, is it better to look at it from the perspective of it's the little things that actually count, and you don't really do one big thing, you do lots of little things that lead up to that?
I think success is purely a definition. Some people might say to win the world championship in table tennis is the biggest honor ever, and some other people might think table tennis doesn't matter. It's purely someone's perception of somebody else's activity. I think you need to do what's important to yourself, and you need to decide what is your definition of personal success, and try and succeed every single day. Don't say, I have to do this thing 5 years from now, otherwise my life has been a failure, or I've been bereft. Instead, have some long-term goals, but as I was saying to Mohit earlier, have that long-term goal, but all the little battles and the little successes, let yourself celebrate those and succeed at those, and try and finish every single day feeling like you've had victory. And then when a big one comes along, I think it puts it into better perspective, rather than just measuring your life by one or two big shiny moments that only you really have to justify.
Let me just bring in
a question.
Yeah, let me just bring in Jo Alda, because Jo Alda, out of everybody, is the person who actually wants to be an astronaut, and she's the youngest, and she's got time to achieve this goal. There's one last thing that you can ask Chris Hadfield, Jo Alda. What is that one thing going to be?
Referring to what you're saying about having a relationship with your other coworkers, how strong would this relationship have to be, like when you're away for if you're going to Mars for over 2 years, you won't see anybody back at Earth. So how strong would that relationship have to be?
Jo Alda, it would need to be a fundamentally different relationship, because you would no longer be part of Earth. In fact, within a few weeks of going to Mars, Earth would be so small that it's just another star. It's no longer an omnipresent part of your life. And the time lag to talk to Earth is going to get so long that they just become some distant help desk. And in fact, your entire reality is going to be your crew. And you won't be Earthlings anymore. Within a few weeks, you would be Martians. That's who you'd be. You'd have to build that psychology. If you were the commander of that crew, Joelda, you would need to deliberately build on the fact that we are now Martians. We are it. This is us. We're not actually counting on anyone else but ourselves. And make that a strength. Make that your whole defining identity as a group of people. Be proud of it. Use it as your identification. And with that, I think you could make the evolution to be successful as the first emissaries to Mars. I don't know any other way that it would work.
So Mohit, Joelda and Eleanor, thank you so much for jumping in there with the questions. Really appreciated that. There's one last thing, Chris, that I was really interested about. I've seen you talk with such passion about science. I know you love space. I'm wondering, retirement, were you pushed or did you jump? Does it get to a stage where you can't do what NASA expects you to do? How do you decide, that's it, I'm not going up into space again? Or is that decided for you?
Well, space flight is very rare. And I was lucky enough to fly in space 3 times, which is almost unprecedented, especially for a Canadian. And my wife and I and our family, we talked for years and said, how do we know when we're finished here? And what is the threshold, as you say, for when it's time to maybe go try something else? And for us, we said, when we know there's never a chance that I'll fly in space again, then it's time to maybe start doing something else, to sharing the experience, to writing about it, to singing about it, to, I have a animated series that we're making right now on the history of science. And I think that's a really important phase. And so when I knew, in discussion with my wife, that after this 5-month space flight, there's just no way I'm ever going to be asked to fly. And I'm getting older. There are younger astronauts. No one pushed me by any means. And I served 21 years as an astronaut. And I'm really happy to have done all that. But I'm very happy with what I'm doing now in life. And I look forward to all of the stuff that's still in front of me.
It shows. Thank you very much, Chris Hadfield, for being on the show. You made us smile for 45 minutes and much longer when we surf your videos online. Malika Bilal, what's the last thing you're going to leave us with?
You're right, Femi. It does show. Two tweets here. This is Ronald, who says, listening to Commander Hadfield was inspiring. And this next person said, this episode of AJ Stream is making me want to be an astronaut.
Does he know about being sick and then having to wear Spanx when you come down?
That part I don't know, because his second sentence that I didn't read talked about the floating and how cool it looked.
Yes. So. There's some very bad things that also happen to your body, but I know Chris Hadfield will say it is totally worth it. Chris Hadfield, thank you so much. Joelda, Eleanor, Mohit, nice questions, really appreciated it. And I'm going to wrap up, reluctantly, this very special space edition of The Stream. Thanks for watching, everybody.